Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about our subject, which is titled The Subjective Experience of a Classic Psychedelic Use and Its Impact on Alcohol Consumption, an Interpretative Phenomenological Analysis. The key words that we're going to talk about in these presentations are classic psychedelics, alcohol consumption, qualitative methods, but also naturalistic settings, which includes recreational setting and ritualistic setting with a shaman or guide. And finally, semi-structured interviews. And so to start the presentation, I want to introduce myself. I'm a master's student in psychology from the University of Montreal. I'm primarily French-speaking, and I'm passionate about research in psychedelics, especially regarding the intersection of psychology, neuroscience, and data science regarding psychedelic research. And so to start off, I want to give a few definitions. What do we define as psychedelics? There are two types. There are the classic psychedelics and the non-classic. The classic psychedelics are a subclass of psychedelics that act on the 5-HT2A serotonergic receptor. The non-classic, on the other hand, are substances that produce similar effect as classic psychedelics, but that has different pharmacological mechanism. And in the case of that presentation, we're going to be talking specifically about classic psychedelics. And that includes psilocybin, 5-MeO-DMT, DMT, ayahuasca, LSD, and mescaline. And so to give you a little bit of background regarding this study, everything started where I noticed people around me, friends and people I met, that had intense psychedelic experience and then changed or reduced their alcohol consumption drastically. I was interested to understand why, and so I researched the topic, and I noticed that in the scientific literature, classic psychedelic use has been associated with alcohol behavior modification in either clinical settings, recreational settings, or in ritualistic setting. And so to introduce you to the Canadian context, which is where I'm from, the research in the psychedelic field is really few. There's very little clinical research at the moment, and the only psychedelic that is available for patients is psilocybin, and it's only available for patients with end-of-life cancer or treatment-resistant depression. Santé Canada, which is the equivalent of the FDA, currently accepts very few clinical projects. And so, considering these barriers, how about instead studying the recreational use of psychedelics? There's many pros in doing that. Usually, studying the recreational use of psychedelics is cheaper than in clinical trials because you just have to give questionnaires to your participants and then they can answer. You don't need to set up a clinical study. It's also easier to conduct and allows for a bigger sample population because 1,000 people can answer surveys. 2,000, we're at 5,000. There's some cons, however. There's a recall bias, meaning that when participants will answer your survey, they probably will have experienced their psychedelic experiences earlier in the past, like a year or 6 months before. And so maybe their memory will be impaired when they will answer your survey, and they won't answer the same answers that they should have if they had their psychedelic experience just before answering the survey. There's also a suggestibility bias, meaning that usually the people that answer this survey are pretty pro-psychedelics, meaning that the answer they will give might not be representative of the whole spectrum of psychedelic experience out there and may not encompass the negative experience of some other people might have lived. So here are a few studies that influenced me to do this study. And so these studies noticed a altered or exchange substance use pattern and alcohol use consumption after using psychedelics in recreational settings. And so all of these studies are survey-based. So the scientists gave questionnaires and the participants answered, and the scientists then saw a significant effect between the variables of alcohol and psychedelics. The problem with these kind of studies is that, although interesting, we don't know what is going on during these experiences. We don't know why do these participants answer the answer they gave. And so we don't have an insight of their mental processes. And so we see a gap in research that we can explore. There's a lot of quantitative findings, but not a lot of qualitative ones. And what do I mean here by qualitative findings? I want to clarify what is the difference between quantitative and qualitative studies. A quantitative study is usually based on questionnaires that scientific gave, so a scientifically validated questionnaire that measure if there's a significant effect between a dependent variable and an independent variable, using a wide array of statistical tests. On the other end, qualitative studies are based off interviews that researchers do with participants. And then with these interviews, they go through an iterative coding analysis. And so here is an example of what is a qualitative method. The researcher here in the little bubble will ask, well, what did you feel when you studied through ice cream? And the participant will share his thoughts regarding that. Similarly, with psychedelics, we could ask, well, how did you live your psychedelic experience and how did it impact you? And then the participant can go much deeper into the details of that. And the researcher can ask more questions and so on. And so the goal of my research here was to understand the lived experience of psychedelic users and how these experiences change their relationship with alcohol using a qualitative methodology. And to do so, I've recruited 15 participants from Montreal, Canada. And I've done semi-structured interviews with them, meaning that I had a guide with some questions I wanted to ask specifically to my participants. But if needed, we could go off topic to explore some topics that my participants deem useful or interesting to explore. The topics that we explored were first their psychedelic use. So everything regarding their history with psychedelics, their attitude and perception with these substances, and how did it shape them. Secondly, we looked at their alcohol use, so their history with alcohol, same thing, but also the place that alcohol has in their life, with their family and their relationships. And finally, we talked about the relationship with alcohol following their psychedelic experience. So to see how did having psychedelic experience with classic psychedelics change their attitudes and perception regarding alcohol. And so here are the results that I'm going to share with you. The way I'm going to share the results are like this. There's going to be 4 big themes. And under these themes, there's going to be many sub-themes. And for each sub-theme, I'm going to present you some excerpt of what my participants said during the interviews. The first theme that I explored regard the motives of using psychedelics. My participants had many reasons to use psychedelics. The main ones were to explore the mind in an altered state, to enhance pleasure, to have a better self-understanding of themselves and heal traumas, and finally to deepen relationship with friends and loved ones. So what I've noticed with these different motives is that the more my participants have motives where they had to do introspection and carefully think about their psychedelic experience before doing it, the more they took the time afterwards to reflect on their experience and reflect on their habit and their relationship with alcohol. And then they had more chance to change them afterwards. So for instance, participants that did psychedelics to explore their mind in an altered state or to better self-understand themselves generally took more time to research and plan their experience than those that did it to enhance pleasure in a festival, for example, or to have fun with their friends in a cottage weekend. And so here, some example from participant 2 that said here on the left, there is no fixed objective. I don't take DMT to deal with certain issues. It is really to open up my horizon. And participant 3 on the right here says, I reached a plateau in my development. I became obsessed with the idea of doing it, talking about psilocybin. So I did plenty of research. And we can see here that participant 3 did more research and carefully planned his experiments in contrary to participant 2. And in the case of participant 3, that's where he did more research and more introspection after their experience. And interestingly, this theme is kind of similar to the concept of set and setting that has been coined by Timothy Leary, a popular Harvard psychologist that was really popular in the 60s. The concept of set and setting that Timothy Leary invented meant that the set and setting, and so the environment and the mental state in which you are before doing psychedelic will have a drastic impact on the experience you're going to get. And so we can see that similarly here, the set and the mental state in which my participants were, and their motivation had a drastic experience of their interpretation with their relationship with alcohol. The second theme that we're going to explore regards the key factors in the alcohol behavior change. And so some participants noticed that after having psychedelic experience, they develop an increased sensitivity towards the social context in which they wanted to drink. and also a better connection with their true motivation to drink. And so what that means is that basically after having their psychedelic experience, my participants will usually ask themselves more questions regarding questions such as, am I in the right context to drink alcohol? Am I with people I want to be with to feel these effects? And also questions regarding their motivation. Do I want to drink alcohol? Do it something I truly want to do right now? Or is it something that I feel pressure to do because of societal pressures or friend pressure? So here's an example of what participants said in that regard on the right. Psychedelics give you the ability to see yourself one-on-one, like if you were seeing yourself from an outsider's perspective. When you see yourself drink in a social setting, you're asking yourself questions regarding these things. You can realize then if it is really necessary to drink. Do I have a problem with alcohol? So there's our personal work that can be done. And so here are a few examples of questions that my participants will ask. So like, do I really need a glass of wine right now? Is the hangover worth it for tonight? Am I in a context where I want to feel the effects of alcohol? And alcohol really numbs my cognition compared to my last psychedelic experience. And so that's interesting. And there's also other reason why my participants change their relation with alcohol. Some found that after having experiences with psychedelics, they found that these class of substances were more convenient for social setting. Mostly because they found that these substances were not as impactful on their cognitive function. They found that when they used psychedelics, they were more enlightened and more present, whereas with alcohol, there's an impact that made them more cognitively loaded, and they felt like they felt less present and talkative when they were on the alcohol, and maybe more tired. And so participants 11 says something in that regard on the left here. When I restarted drinking again and I had an alcohol withdrawal, I realized that I had normalized these effects that I was feeling. And because I haven't had a proper hangover in months, I found it intense. I realized how much having a hangover twice a week in a regular life was really intense for their body. So participant 11 here says that after experiencing psychedelics and then doing alcohol again, he realized how much alcohol had an impact on him and how much he didn't realize it until he had experiences with psychedelics that were more enlightening for him. The third theme that I'm going to talk to you about today is about the co-use or not of psychedelics and alcohol. And so my participants had many reasons to either use or not use psychedelics and alcohol together. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the reason of why not using both substances together. Some participants mentioned that there is a sensory clash between alcohol and psychedelics. Psychedelics will make them see more visuals or maybe enhance their physical touch or their colors around them. But alcohol will do the opposite. It will numb their physical sensation, see less lights, etc. And so there's a clash there that my participants didn't like. Some participants also mentioned that both substances have different function, completely different function, whereas alcohol will be for social settings and psychedelics for more work, personal work, self-introspection. And so my participants will really isolate their psychedelic experience. They will make sure to do them in a day where they plan everything. Maybe they wouldn't drink or eat a certain time before the experience, and we really make sure to not use anything but psychedelics. And participant 6 says something in that regard. In my head, psychedelics are sacred. Like I don't want to mix them with everything in the sense that I have to respect them. Alcohol seems unnecessary because it reduces your conscience. It makes you dumber, while psychedelics brings me farther and makes me think differently about things. And so those are the reasons not to use psychedelics and alcohol. But some participants found that using both substances was useful. For instance, in regards with anxiety, some participants found that using alcohol before psychedelics will help to reduce the anxiety before having intense experiences with psychedelics. So they will drink alcohol to calm themselves down before going into these experiences. Another reason why combining both these substances regards the balancing effect of psychedelics and alcohol to reach an optimal effect that my participant wanted. So, for example, a participant will drink 8 glasses of wine in one social night, but instead will drink 3 glasses of wine and then take a microdose of psychedelics to reach the same effect as they would with 8 glasses of wine, but without the negative effect of the hangover they will have with alcohol the next day. So you balancing both substances was a way to find a way to be more sociable without the negative effect afterwards. Participant 10 said in that regard, When I'm going to do psychedelics, either mushroom or acid, I will take the psychedelic first and wait until it is installed to drink or smoke. When we are conscious and drink slowly, I like that we can have the same effect, but with 3 times less quantity that you will have needed if you only drank alcohol. And the final theme regards the therapeutic potential of psychedelics. My participants found many reasons that made psychedelic therapeutic, which regards to the sense of belonging and unconditional love that psychedelics can to them. And participants forested in that regard. When you have an addiction, it's similar to seeking validation or searching for a sense of love. The pursuit of substances is a way of searching for that feeling, but once psychedelics makes me feel what it's like to be unconditionally loved, it ended a quest I didn't even know I was on at the time. And so these participants realized that when she had experiences with ayahuasca and psilocybin, she felt what was it like to be unconditionally loved. And she didn't realize that in the past, she was using alcohol to make her feel that way. But then when she experienced it in a really profound way, she realized that she didn't need substances such as alcohol and cannabis to relieve those feelings. And so she stopped her problematic alcohol use. Other reasons that psychedelics can be therapeutic regards for them to be used as tools for substance use modulation and harm reduction. So some participants prefer to use psychedelics instead of other more harmful drugs in their terms, such as alcohol or methamphetamine in some cases. Participants 14 said here, mushrooms can help people who take hard drugs to come back to the real world. It can also help people in the real world to connect with the rest. I think it is overall good for society and also for people who drink a lot of alcohol to see other things. And so here, participant 14 mentioned that he used psilocybin, which he found more healthier, to still get a high for some kind of drugs, but a better high than other highs, in his opinion, such as a high with alcohol or stimulants. And finally, another way that psychedelics were therapeutic regards to the enhanced introspection that these substances gave. So the participants found that psychedelics gave them a better introspection to think and reflect about their life. And that, in that sense, were really therapeutic for some of them. And so, although interesting, these themes that I uncovered with you today, there's a few limitations that I want to share regarding my study. Firstly, it is an exploratory qualitative study. And so, although interesting, there's no causality that can be made here. I cannot say that people will have psychedelic experience and will feel these things. It's not possible. What I can say is just with the sample that I had, these are the results that I found. Secondly, there's a selection and recall bias. A selection bias, meaning that my participants were really pro-psychedelics. And so maybe that my results aren't representative of the whole spectrum of psychedelic experience. People that have really bad psychedelic experience might not have wanted to participate in my study. And there's also a recall bias, meaning that although one of the criteria of my study was to have had experiences with psychedelics 1 year or less prior to the study, there's still a possibility that my participants had a memory that was impaired, and what they recall during the study is not exactly what they lived. Thirdly, there's not enough sample size to observe meaningful pattern, meaning that although I had enough participants for a qualitative study, which is 10 to 20, which is normal in this kind of study, I couldn't, for example, see patterns between differences between, for example, men, women, or non-binary, or differences between psilocybin and LSD, or LSD and ayahuasca. So there wasn't enough sample size for that. And finally, there's a big problem of temporality, meaning that I don't know when do my participants change their relation with alcohol after living their psychedelic experiences. Is it after a day, after a week, after months? We don't know that. And also, we don't know if there's other variables that we didn't explore during the interviews that might also have impacted the relationship with alcohol in parallel with psychedelics. But in conclusion, considering these limits, we can say that even in non-clinical settings, my study showed that psychedelics can maybe have a positive effect on problematic alcohol use. And I hope that by listening to my talk, you saw the advantage of using qualitative methodologies to study the subjective psychedelic experience, and also to complement quantitative methodologies that are, although interesting, might not be enough to go deeper in a subject. And I hope that in the future, you might maybe use these kind of methodologies to explore how the psychedelic experience is lived by the people using them. And to finish the talk, I want to do some acknowledgement. I want to thank my supervisors, Christophe Wynne and Jean-Sébastien Fallu. And also, I would like to thank the following organization on the screen for their financial support throughout my academic journey. Thank you.